When we left off in part 2, Rare was just finishing up their run on the Nintendo 64. Rare's Nintendo 64 years were filled with incredible critical and commercial successes as well as crushing failures. Nintendo had decided that Rare's next game and newest IP, Dinosaur Planet, should be changed into the next game in the Star Fox series. The newly rechristened Star Fox Adventures left Rare's Dinosaur Planet team demoralized. It would also be Rare's first and last game for the Nintendo GameCube. Nintendo never truly sought to buy out Rare and bring them in as a first-party developer, something that Rare co-founder Tim Stamper never understood. In fact, rumors suggest that Rare made a financial pitch to Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi, who offered a substantially lower amount in response. Rare's Nintendo 64 performance wasn't terrible by any means, but it never reached the heights of their Super Nintendo days, and as such, Nintendo had some reservations about the company's overall value. Nintendo was still a strong partner for Rare, but the Stampers were ready to increase the scope of their vision and maybe more importantly, at least on a personal level, to expand to a more mature audience. When you combine Nintendo's unwillingness to provide Rare with more capital, with the fact that video games were becoming more and more expensive to develop, one can see why they would begin to actively seek out a buyer. Activision and Microsoft both showed interest, but in the end, it was Microsoft's $375 million purchase in September of 2002 that snagged Rare away from Nintendo. Rare was now a full-fledged first-party developer for Microsoft. Character trademarks from games developed by Rare for Nintendo consoles, such as CONKER of Conker's Bad Fur Day and Banjo of the Banjo-Kazooie series, were retained by Rare. The sale left the upcoming GameCube title Donkey Kong Racing, an unfinished sequel of sorts to Diddy's earlier racer, unfinished and unreleased. During a transitional period following the sale, an additional 30 employees left Rare. Rare only released 2 games for Microsoft's first Xbox console.
It's good to face your fears together. It's good to turn a haunted house into a haunted pile of rubble together. It's good to see what happens when good kids go bad together. Grabbed by the ghoulies from Rare to make us a Donkey Kong country, ready to eat for everyone. It's good to play together.
Released in October of 2003, Grabbed by the Ghoulies was an action-adventure game that follows a young boy, Cooper Chance, in his quest to rescue his girlfriend from a mansion haunted by supernatural creatures. The game received mixed reviews. The graphics and animation were often praised by critics, but others noted that despite the crisp graphics and animations, the character designs still harkened to the previous generation's consoles and were better suited for the Nintendo 64. The game was also criticized for its simplistic gameplay, repetitive nature, and lack of innovation. Had another developer released Grabbed by the Ghoulies, these things may have been overlooked, but Rare's reputation as a creative and innovative developer was a bit of a double-edged sword. More was expected of Rare, and okay or even good wasn't good enough. One GameRevolution.com review went as far to say that the game relied heavily on what is practically 16-bit gameplay. Grabbed by the Ghoulies would go on to become one of Rare's biggest commercial flops. Rare also released CONKER, Live and Reloaded, a remastered but somewhat ironically more heavily censored version of CONKER's Bad Fur Day from the N64. It also included a new multiplayer mode that is different from the Nintendo 64 version. CONKER Live and Reloaded's multiplayer consisted of game modes such as Capture the Flag and standard death matches. The player can participate as a member of SHC or the Teddies. The game has a choice of classes which significantly affect gameplay style as well. Originally titled CONKER, Live and Uncut, the game was set to feature a completely uncensored single-player experience. At some point during the development, both the title and the level of uncensored content were changed. Even minor obscenities which were present in the original Nintendo 64 version were censored. This drew criticism from fans of the original, especially as it detracted from comedic highlights such as the Great Mighty Pooh song in the Untitled Chapter. This song was even censored on the soundtrack. Commercially, Rare's remastered Xbox version of CONKER performed even worse than the original. Despite now being a first-party developer for Microsoft, Rare wasn't done creating games for Nintendo hardware. Microsoft wasn't a competitor in the mobile gaming market, so they gave Rare their blessing to develop for the Game Boy Advance and beyond. In 2003, Rare released Banjo-Kazooie, Grunty's Revenge for the Game Boy Advance. This was followed up by Sabrewulf, released in 2004, also for the Game Boy Advance. At E3 2004, Microsoft announced that Rare had obtained Nintendo DS development kits and was working on games for the Nintendo DS. Released in 2007, the first of these games was a remake of the Nintendo 64 title Diddy Kong Racing, creatively renamed Diddy Kong Racing DS. In 2008, Rare would release Viva Pinata Pocket Paradise for the Nintendo DS. But before Rare could release either of these titles for the Nintendo DS, Rare was called back for console duty. Microsoft wanted two Rare titles at the forefront of the Xbox 360 launch, and time was not on their side. Rare decided that instead of creating two new titles from scratch, they would be better off picking back up where they left off on two games that had been moved to the back burner. Both of the titles that Rare chose had started their lives off as GameCube titles. In fact, the first, Cameo Elements of Power, was actually set to be a flagship game for the GameCube console. Rare tried to redesign it for the original Xbox, but ended up canceling it midway through development. Cameo Elements of Power takes a comely young elf, gives her shape-shifting powers, and sets her loose to pummel and puzzle her way through a richly designed world. Reviewers praised the game's graphics as setting standards for the new console. One Eurogamer review considered the degree of detail, even at long distances and in processor-intensive scenes, unprecedented in a console game. Initial sales figures were below expectations, but Cameo continued to sell as long as 3 years after its release, eventually making it a commercial success. Rare's second launch title was its real ace in the hole. Perfect Dark Zero had originally made a public appearance at Nintendo Space World 2000 event, but largely vanished afterwards. A new version of Perfect Dark Zero was about a year away from completion for the original Xbox when word came down to bump it up to the 360. Rare was forced to remove several features to meet the game's release deadline. Even with a rushed production schedule, Perfect Dark Zero still received generally positive reviews. However, despite the positive reviews, many critics still felt that the game underdelivered. Perfect Dark Zero's multiplayer became the test platform for Xbox Live, and the design team jumped on board the new achievement system, setting precedents for shooter achievements that would be copied in nearly every Xbox shooter for years. The head start Rare had on design and production paid off. Both games were regarded as among the better launch titles for the Xbox 360, and both became million-unit sellers. In 2006, the company released Viva Pinata, a sandbox game involving gardening. Originally titled Your Garden, the game was the brainchild of Rare co-founder Tim Stamper. Over the next 4 years, a team of about 50 people, many from the Banjo-Kazooie team, molded Tim's idea into Viva Pinata, a bright and colorful game in which players raise, breed, and provide for candy-named pinata animals. Rare and Microsoft both had high expectations for Viva Pinata beyond just the video game world. 4Kids TV had agreed to make a Viva Pinata cartoon before the game was released, and a deal had been worked out with Six Flags Mexico for Viva Pinata to have an in-park presence. Critics in the US praised it as the best game Rare had made since the Microsoft buyout and signaled a return to greatness. Despite the fantastic reviews, sales for Viva Pinata were disappointing. In an interview at the San Diego Comic-Con, Rare spokesman James Thomas hinted at sour feelings inside Rare when he criticized Microsoft putting all its marketing muscle behind Gears of War at Viva Pinata's expense. Shortly after, on January 2, 2007, Tim and Chris Stamper announced that they were leaving Rare, a company that they had founded 25 years earlier. No reason was given other than to pursue other interests. In 2008, Rare unveiled their work on Xbox Live avatars, Viva Pinata Trouble in Paradise, and Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Nuts and Bolts was made by the same core team that developed the first Banjo-Kazooie game, but it was heavily criticized by players due to its focus on vehicle construction instead of traditional platforming. Despite positive reviews, the company's titles for Microsoft sold poorly, and Microsoft decided to restructure the studio at the end of the decade. Microsoft also announced a focus on Xbox Live avatars and Kinect for Rare going forward.
It's not about winning or losing. It's about how you play the game. You are the controller. Introducing Kinect for Xbox 360.
Rare's first Kinect title, Kinect Sports, was released in November of 2010. Kinect Sports was originally going to be called Sports Star and feature complex and realistic sports simulation games. During development, the game was streamlined into what Microsoft executive Don Mattrick hoped would be the Kinect's answer to Wii Sports. According to a Rare employee, the team was getting worried about the game during its development because of Kinect's limitations. Despite mostly getting average reviews, it was a commercial success, selling 3 million units by May 2011. Many non-Kinect teams at Rare and Big Park, another Microsoft studio, worked together on its sequel, Kinect Sports Season 2. Combined, both games went on to sell more than 8 million copies. In 2013, Rare brought back its Killer Instinct franchise as a free-to-play launch title for the Xbox One. To date, each of Killer Instinct's 3 release seasons have been positively received. Rare's third installment of its Kinect Sports franchise, Kinect Sports Rivals, was released in 2014. The game was worked on by 150 staff members and featured a new game engine. Unfortunately, the game was a commercial failure, and following Microsoft's announcement that the Kinect would no longer be a priority, about 15 Rare employees were laid off. At E3 2015, Rare Replay, a compilation celebrating the studio's 30th anniversary, was announced. The compilation featured 30 of the studio's previous titles, but due to licensing issues, it lacked some of Rare's most popular games, such as the Donkey Kong series and GoldenEye. Despite not including its most popular titles, Rare Replay became the most pre-ordered game shown at E3 that year, and received critical acclaim upon launch. Rare's original founders, Chris and Tim Stamper, are still involved in the gaming world. Both are investors in Fortune Fish, a mobile game company founded by Tim's son, Joe Stamper. In an August 2015 interview, Tim Stamper revealed that he and Chris had been working on several projects over the 8 years since they left Rare. In classic Stamper fashion, Tim wouldn't reveal the details of their projects, but did say that their goal remains unchanged: to continue to push forward what can be done with software. There's no denying that the Stampers and Rare can be credited with an impressive catalog of great games, but they also had their fair share of disappointments and, frankly, a slew of lazily made licensed games for the NES that were nothing more than quick cash grabs. Today, a lot of people think of Rare as a company that just makes Kinect Sports titles and Xbox Avatar items. It wasn't that long ago that the development studio was a visionary force in the video game industry, and for a time, they stood as equals with Nintendo and created some of the best games ever made. It seems that just when fans and critics alike begin to count Rare out, they deliver a Donkey Kong Country, or a Banjo-Kazooie, or a GoldenEye. At 2015's E3, Rare didn't just announce Rare Replay. They also announced a new game, Sea of Thieves, a multiplayer adventure game that Microsoft executive Kudo Tsunoda boldly declared is the best game that Rare has ever made. With a planned release for some time in 2017, only time will tell whether Rare's next masterpiece is just around the corner. If you like these kind of videos and want to see more, please be sure to check out the rest of my gaming documentaries, and hey, why not subscribe?